Good day to you, everybody. Welcome back to our Bible study. Today we are talking about Psalm 94, and our PDF is available for free out on our website if you'd like to download it. It's 2 pages every day with all the key information on it. We are discussing Psalm 94, and we do not know the author. The author is not listed in this psalm. We do, however, have a New Testament reference today, and that comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 20. In terms of our themes, God is aware of all of the evil that happens on the earth. None of it escapes his notice. He's aware of it. He will protect his people from it, and ultimately, he will take vengeance against those evildoers. And then in verse 6, we come across a word that needs to be defined, and depending on which translation you have, it's probably the word strangers or sojourners, as I have in the ESV in my translation. So a stranger or a sojourner is a term that was used to refer to foreigners. That would be people who were not descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob, who lived amongst the Israelites in the Promised Land. We've got 2 sections to look at in our outline today. The first one is verses 1 through 11. No sin is hidden from the eyes and the ears of God. The psalmist calls on the God of vengeance to punish the wicked and to judge the earth. There were all kinds of wicked people springing up all over the earth, and the psalmist wanted to know how long it was going to take for God to judge them, to give them what they deserve for their wicked actions. He wrote in verse 7, "They crush your people, O Lord, and afflict your heritage. They kill the widow and the sojourner and murder the fatherless. And they say, the Lord does not see, the God of Jacob does not perceive." They didn't believe that God was going to do anything about their wickedness. They had become so proud, so foolish, that they actually believed that they were just going to get away with it forever. They lived as if God was deaf and blind to all of their deeds. But the psalmist writes here that that's certainly not the case, and it's actually these wicked people who are the fools, and he calls them dull for living this way. It was God who made human ears. Of course he could hear. He made human eyes. Of course he could see their wickedness. So God not only heard their schemes and observed their sins, but he even knew their thoughts. God knew these people better than they even knew themselves. That brings us to section number 2, verses 12 through 23. God will not forsake his people. He's not going to give them over to these evildoers. Now, in contrast to these wicked people, the psalmist writes that a man who is taught and disciplined by God, he is going to be a blessed man. That in contrast to these people who try to ignore God, try to pretend that he doesn't exist. To this man who is taught and disciplined by God, God offers stability and comfort. And returning back to this title of the God of vengeance that the psalmist gives to the Lord at the beginning of the psalm, the psalmist writes that these godly people, these righteous people who are being oppressed by the evil, they don't need to fear because God will eventually take vengeance on those who are oppressing them and mistreating them. And I think that's really important to point out that the psalmist characterizes God in this way because, yes, of course, God is love. But to people who persist in sin, who pretend that God doesn't exist, and especially people who oppress the righteous, people who oppress God's people, God will not be a God of love forever, but he will be a God of vengeance, and he will come after those people and give them what they deserve. The psalmist portrays God as his hero, this hero who is going to rise up and save him, in the day of trouble, save him from his enemies. He was confident that God would, quote, bring back on them their iniquity and wipe them out for their wickedness. Before we close today, let's talk about an application. I want to talk about the idea of discipline because that is mentioned in this chapter. This chapter explains the purpose and the heart of proper discipline, and I think that's very important, especially for parents. In this psalm, the writer blesses the man who is disciplined by God because he says that man will avoid, quote, days of trouble. God disciplines or chastens, as the Old King James has it, his people to redirect them away from paths that will lead them into future trouble. Parents need to discipline their children for the same reason. We discipline our children because we love them and we want their future to be filled with good days rather than troubled days. Discipline's goal is to uproot the growth of ungodly behavior in a child as soon as it's observed. Refusing to discipline gives time for those roots to grow stronger and deeper, which means they'll be all the harder to pull out of the heart later. We must tend the garden of our children's hearts every day. Just as weeding a garden isn't always pleasant, disciplining isn't always pleasant, but it is necessary to prepare a soul to bear fruit in a bright future.